Hello, fellow humans, and welcome to the 11.3 tech tree review. And yes, I did it on purpose. But anyway, let's have a look at this entire line. Let's start off with the consumable provisions and all that first, because they're pretty much the same across the entire line, with one exception, but we'll talk about it later. Equipment, standard as always, 2 repair kits, adrenaline, nothing new there. Provisions, fuel, big food, and then small food or protective kit, that's up to you. Ammo, something like this. Diagonal line is in most cases a good sort of starting point to go for. And then in terms of the equipment, you can go for the gun armor, you can go for the calibrated. It does have heat, so calibrated might be very useful. You go up to 360 nice penetration here, so that can be definitely very useful. The last row is obviously the same. Toolbox, proved assembly, refined gun for the tier 6. Vertical stabilizer is the better option. And then obviously the Hunt's gun laying drive, because it's not a tank destroyer. Now let's have a look at the full tech tree, and what you can immediately see is that the tier 6 is a medium tank, so it doesn't very fit in very well, obviously. It's a regular, standard tier 6 medium tank. You've played one, you play them all, pretty much. There's nothing special about it. 200 alpha damage is very nice to have. It works just about fine enough. However, to not have insanely red mobility stats down here, let's get rid of it. Now let's have a look at the heavy tanks then, and all of them do have heat rounds except the 110. So obviously, calibrated can be useful for 7, 9, and 10. Definitely would not use it at tier 8. The DPM increases not that much from tier 7 to tier 9, but then massively jumps at tier 10. Penetration, again, goes up very linearly. You have very good heat rounds. Here, the tier 9 has a very solid gun. Obviously, the hull doesn't match up with the tier 10. However, the gun is very much there, and the tier 9 actually does have higher alpha damage, just like the tier 7 has higher alpha damage than the tier 8, which is a bit of a weird thing to get used to, so the continuity in the line isn't very great there. However, the rest of it is not that bad, and in terms of weapon handling, the tier 7 is pretty bad at that. However, then as you go up, you have a sort of better accuracy with the tier 8 and the tier 10, which are obviously smaller guns that do less damage. So it does kind of make sense in terms of the gun depression. You got 5.6, 5.6. In terms of mobility, they're very similar in that regard. The tier 7, the tier 9, and the tier 10 pretty much have identical mobility in that regard. The tier 8 is a tiny bit slower. And then in terms of traverse, again, tier 7 and tier 10 traverse the same. Those two are a bit slower at that. And now, armor, obviously, it does go up. The 113's armor profile is pretty damn solid. Obviously, the lower plate is a weak spot. However, the front plate is about 300mm thick, so you will require premium ammunition to get through it, which is always very nice, because then the enemy has to essentially reduce their DPM to be effective against you. And you with 3,400 DPM, or 3,200 if you use calibrated, you're going to have a very, very great time. Turret is very, very strong. However, you try to wiggle it a bit, because again, you have the weakness in the middle here, right next to the gun, but it is very, very small. Now, gun depression, only 6 degrees, which is on the worst side, essentially, which means the cupolas can be shot in a lot of positions. However, they're very far back on the turret. The turret is not the longest, but it is long enough, and the cupolas are very far back, so they're going to be quite tricky to actually hit. And it's a very long boy. It's a very, very long tank, which is not always a great idea, especially if you're trying to cross a weak spot or somewhere in the map. That's not great. However, you can side scrape it reasonably well. It does work. However, obviously, you're going to have to watch out for the plate up here that doesn't stick out. And if you're trying to shoot, it is going to stick out, but you can side scrape unless you peek. So the armor profile is definitely solid. And now let's get into the gameplay of the Chinese heavy tank line with the medium tank, and that is the Type 58. Now, obviously, this is a T-3485 in Chinese, just like the next tanks are basically going to be copies of already existing Russian tanks. So basically, if you have played the IS-7 line, you know how this one's going to play, at least for the most part. Now, this is a very standard tier 6 medium tank with 200 alpha damage, 128mm of standard penetration, 0.34 accuracy, 7 degrees of gun depression. That is solid for what it is. It can be played quite well. And again, if you've played any other tier 6 medium tank before this one, you can have somewhat of an idea how this one plays. There's nothing special about it. It isn't amazing. What is amazing, though, is Wargaming servers. or my internet as well, which is very German, as in over-engineered and underperforming. So, yeah. Now, what we have here, again, very standard tank. Nothing special, nothing important here. It doesn't really give an idea of how the rest of the line is like, so that's a bit of an inaccuracy. It's not really great because you start off with a tank into a line that doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the line, because this is a medium tank, the rest is going to be heavy tanks, so that's obviously not very great. And ideally, you want to have a tier 6 heavy tank here to get a bit more experience. So this is not a line that I would recommend if you're a beginner or if you're an entry to the game. Then an E100 line and 60 TP line are going to be better options most of the time, because they at least have a more linear line, if you get what I mean. Now, as always, this is tier 6, no one has any skill. Then again, in tier 10, no one has any either. So all you have to do is simply poke out the enemy, have a shot at them, and boom. Now what I do, I could show Ace Tanker for every tank in this kind of texture review. Now, I'm not going to do that because, first of all, I can't be bothered to play for 3 hours to get the luck to get one. And the thing is, from an ace, it's an ace. It's great to have. However, it's not always the best thing to have. So, I'm just playing all these in a row. I think I played the W's at the tier 9 twice. But everything else is just once in a row. So you can get an accurate experience of what it's just going to be like on average. Because most ace tanker games do involve some luck that otherwise isn't present in every regular game. So I prefer showing above average battles to pretty good. I mean, these are still super unicum performance battles, but obviously they're not like super interesting hard carries, because from those you're not going to get those in 99.99% cases. However, something like 1.7k in a T3045, that is perfectly doable and is definitely fine. Now, we go to the IS-2, which is a copy of the IS. Now, you have 400 alpha damage, you have a pretty not that great accuracy. Obviously, you now go from a medium tank to a heavy tank, so you get almost 5 effective horsepower per ton less. So, that's not great. You also have absolute horrible accuracy of 0.4, so that's really not great. And you also lose some gun depression down to 5. However, obviously, you do get the 400 alpha damage. You have some armor in this one, T3045. It has plot armor. Sometimes it bounces. Most of the time it doesn't. This thing, you can angle it quite well. If you turn it left and right, it can side scrape reasonably well too. However, with the front plate, you know, you have the lower plate. It's flat. You're going to get penned through that. Duh. Now, this is one of those tanks where it's basic, essentially. There's nothing special about it. And again, if you've played the regular IS before, you can play this thing as well. Even if you played a Tiger 1, you can have some kind of idea of how it's going to work. Ideally, you don't want to YOLO, you don't want to push too fast. However, obviously, you want to be towards the front of the battle, because otherwise you can't hit anything. If you put this thing into the back line, you're not going to get any damage at all. So obviously, the accuracy on this thing is absolutely, utterly miserable. However, overall, it's a solid tank at, well, it's obviously not Smasher level by any means, so if you're facing a Smasher, then get out. That is the best thing you can do when you're facing a Smasher. You might be fine against something like an Annihilator, but obviously, against a tier 6 tank destroyer, you'll be perfectly fine. Now, the DPM on this vehicle is 1,900, which is not great, but then again, a lot of tier 8 heavy tanks don't have more than that either. I wouldn't try to fight with a tier 8 heavy on purpose, especially if it's a 2FTU or a T4 E2. However, it is definitely capable of doing sufficient enough damage. And as you can see, all I'm doing here essentially, I went up towards the middle, and then I'm picking out my targets. What can I find? And this is pretty much how I play every tank, which is why I hate playing tank destroyers, because then I can't do that, where I sort of go to the middle of the map and then pick my targets. Where can I go to get damage without getting damaged, basically? And that's what I'm doing with this. You know, in the middle, dynamically move around. It's all about the game awareness of what you see that's going on in the game. Obviously, it takes a while to learn the maps, to learn the tanks. Obviously, the more you know about all the tanks, if you know the enemy's reload, for example, you know what you can do. If you know the enemy mobility, and if you know the map, or they can go there in that time, all those kind of things. Blitz is a strategy game. The more knowledge you have about the game, about the maps, about the tanks, the better you will be. Aiming alone isn't going to get anything done. And this is a very basic tank that is a very basic playstyle, as in, get shots, try to not get shot too often, and don't go into the bad parts of the map, like for example the city on Black Goldville or the seaside of Fort Despair, which is also not a great idea, because the problem of these sides of the maps is always that you don't have any control. You don't have any control over what's going on because you're stuck in one little corner and the enemy can surround you pretty easily. And you're going to see that in this 110 gameplay right here. That if you're not having a great team, you can still do very well. However, it depends on your own skill. Now, the 110 does have 2,200 DPM, which is a bit tends to be a bit higher than a lot of the other tier 8 premiums, tier 8 heavies. So that's not too bad. However, you do trade with it, but you don't have the 400 alpha damage of an IS-3. You only have 310 on the top gun of this tank. However, obviously it's a lot more accurate. It has 1 degree more gun depression than the IS-2. One of the weak spots of this tank, like it is on the IS-2 as well, is the cupolas on top of the vehicle. Obviously, the turret is quite impenetrable from the front. However, obviously the cupolas stick out quite high. And if a higher tank, this is a very, very low vehicle, so TF-42, it's going to be a higher tank. If that's above, you can shoot straight down into the top of the turret. Easy penetration right there. So try and not have that happen. Don't try and face hug anyone that is higher, because they're just going to shoot with the cupolas and you're gone. And the ideal thing, obviously, with the 310 alpha damage, you can trade with a lot of tier 7s, and obviously especially medium tanks. However, you're going to have to watch out for trying to trade and trying to fight with tanks with higher alpha damage, like a 2FTU, like a even T2020, stuff like that. And again, I'm doing the same here as in the IS-2. I'm looking what is going on right now. What is my team doing? What am I doing? Where can I get damage? I can see, okay, I can peek the Smasher. Those 3 guys are being held back by the IS-3, which means I can peek the Smasher. The Smasher's not looking at me, therefore the Smasher can't shoot me. The Smasher can't damage me. Those 3 guys are distracted, so they're unlikely to shoot me. Boom, I can shoot the Smasher and take a shot right there. And now we're down to 3 on the team. And now, ideally, what you want to do in a situation like this, you get out of the situation as far as possible. You never want to charge in. You never want to play aggressive in a situation like this, because obviously you don't want the enemy to swarm you and go all the way at you. No, very high roll there on the TF4. Obviously helps quite a lot. And again, I don't want them to get around me, because obviously if I have 1 gun and if I have 3 people on me, they can obviously do a lot more damage than I can do, because I have 1 gun. There are multiple tanks with multiple guns. So ideally, you want to remove yourself from the situation as much as possible in a situation like that. And with a couple of milliseconds to spare, the Chieftain still gets me. However, this is still 3,000 damage, despite, again, playing the middle, looking around, what's going on the battle, just by having a bit of game awareness. No special tactics there. All you gotta do is try to go to the middle and play from there. Have the awareness, what's going on. Look around yourself. It is harder to do that on a phone than it is on a PC, obviously, because you see a lot less and you have your fingers in the way as well. However, you can still try your absolute best there. And that's how you get good at the game, right? The more you know of what's going on, the better you'll be. Hello there. Thank you very much for recognizing me, and thank you also for all of your support, obviously. Really, really appreciate that. But to remind you, I'm just a guy. I don't want to have any other fame or anything like that, so I appreciate it, but treat me as any other player, please. That's what I would appreciate. Now let's have a look at the tier 9, the 111-1-4, which is a very standard tank again. 5 degrees of gun depression, 460 alpha damage. The easiest way to talk about tier 9s is essentially to think of it as a combination of tier 8 and tier 10, where a lot of tier 9s have a tier 8 hull and a tier 10 gun, or the other way around as well. And that's pretty much the easiest way to remember that kind of. Some tanks like the Moiskin, there's just a mini version of the tier 10 as well. But something like a Vickers CR, something like this one, it's basically a tier 10 gun on a tier 8 hull, because it's a 111 hull, basically. So in terms of armor, you can't expect much here. It's gonna go pretty much straight through. The 110 tier for tier has a bit more. It also has a steeper angle on its pike nose. So in this thing, most shots are gonna go through. You have a better turret than on a tier 8. However, you lack the gun depression, so going hull down is not going to happen in most cases. 460 alpha damage, though, is higher. It's very nice to have. Obviously, 12 seconds reload. Not too bad. The accuracy and the mobility on this thing ain't too bad either. However, they will get better once we get to tier 10. And again, same thing here. You go with the team, ideally towards the medium tank side. You don't want to go into a city. Obviously, it depends on the map. Some maps, like, for example, Winter Malinovka, where the city is in the middle, then that can be very helpful. It's less about what the city is, that it is a city. It's more about the placing of it. Whereas if you go to the one side, you don't really want to be there because you're stuck in a corner. Like Altenstadt as well. If you go to the far side over, you're probably going to lose in most cases. So, ideally, middle, medium side, that's what you want to hold. And you get... From there, you can get the map control. But you still want to stay together as a team, because then the enemy can't... If they're all together as 7, they can't full push. And that will result in them winning. Because obviously, 7 versus 3 in one situation, it's going to be very easy. Now the mouse, he's come out of his natural habitat, and he's went up the hill, which results in losing all of his hit points. And yeah, that's very easy things to do, is to just simply not peek in front of the entire enemy team, because that way you don't lose any hit points. And with a vehicle like this, it's not a super heavy, it's not designed to soak up the damage. This is more of a heavium kind of vehicle as well, because it doesn't really have the armor to tank shots effectively. And I wouldn't like just frontline it out. Oh my god, I'm gonna bounce shots. Don't expect that to happen. You can work with the turret, however the hull is not that great. You know, the easiest way to not take damage is simply not get shot. And with that said, that doesn't mean that you're supposed to camp, right? It just means think about when you peek, where you peek, and who you peek. And then you can avoid getting shot. When the enemy is currently looking at someone else, you peek him, boom, free damage, just like that. It's about strategy, and it's about how you use a vehicle. And it is true for a lot of tanks. Obviously, tank destroyers work different in that regard, because you can't do that go to the middle and figure out what's going on playstyle that I really like to do. You have to play a bit more passive. You can try and do it. It's not going to work that well. That's why you're most likely not going to see any tank destroyer tech reviews from me in the near future. Now, the crown jewel, the forgotten gem, the Far East Beast, the 113. 3,400 DPM on this vehicle as a tier 10 heavy tank. That is quite a lot. They also have heat rounds on this thing, so if you use calibrated, you can get up to over 370 millimeters of penetration on the heat rounds, which is very good. You have good heat round damage as well, and 420 standard alpha damage, which is very nice. It's above the regular 400, not as high as that of an IS-7. You also don't have the armor of the IS-7, especially in the front. It's very flat. However, most tanks, especially T9s, are going to need premium rounds to get through the front. You have 6 degrees of gun depression on this thing, which is obviously not great. That's one of the weaknesses. And the second big weakness of this vehicle is that it is very, very long. Now, why is that weak? Well, it has one advantage, as in if a light tank's trying to circle you, they have to go a longer way. They have to go a longer radius, so you have a better time to try and catch up. However, a long tank is a tank that is easier to hit, so that's not great to have, obviously. And the track wheels are also very big, but that is true for a lot of tanks. Now, what is the strength of this vehicle? It has absolutely insane DPM for a heavy tank. Combine that with the 420 alpha damage with the excellent heat penetration, you have a very, very, very solid gun on a very good platform as well. It goes pretty fast in a straight line. It has been sort of changed that now it's a bit slower on a straight line, but it traverses faster, but it still kind of does turn like a boat. So you have more Chinese fishing boat mobility rather than Monaco yacht. So what do you have here? You have a tank that is very well rounded, except for its gun depression, and a tank that can do a lot of things if you know how to play it. Is it better than the IS-7 in the right hands? It absolutely will be in a random battle. We don't talk about tournaments here. That's a completely different situation with completely different requirements. What is good for tournaments might not even be relevant in regular battles. So, again, MX-50B, kind of feel bad for it these days with how that thing ended up, but the big clip's still there. However, HE rounds do work as well. Over 500 alpha damage right there. And straight through them. Free damage right there, and that's 4.5k damage, just like that, randomly. Again, same play style. Pick your shots. If the enemy is doing something dumb, punish them for it, and think before you act, obviously, because otherwise you're going to YOLO into 10 enemies and die, and the become the average Dracula player. Now, let's get into game number 2. And obviously, this vehicle is very good if you know what you're doing. And the main thing about it is that it's sort of underrated. Like, everyone's talking about the E100, the IS-7, the IS-4. This thing is a bit on the sidelines, right? Because, well, it's the Chinese line. Who cares about those, right? Now, it is a very, very strong tank, and I definitely recommend grinding it. Not for your first, not for your second, but then once you have 5 tier 10s, once you have an E100, once you have a 60 TP, that is a tank that you get. Now, the line isn't the greatest. Well, it's better than the IS-7 line, though, at least. So, there's something. And the 113 is, in my eyes, also better than the IS-7. It is harder to play, obviously. You don't have the as insane side armor. You don't have the pike nose. However, you have a massively better gun. And, yeah, I don't know what happened this game. The T100 LT just YOLO'd in and died, and the rest of the team are going to that side. And you don't really necessarily want to do that. Himmelsdorf is one of those things. It's ideally, you pick 7 people together and push one side. That's the easiest way to fix this map. But, yeah, I don't think this map... It should even be in Blitz, but... Anyway, that's just me. Now, 5A, why the hell would you want that? This tank, the 113, is massively better than the 5A because the 5A ain't got the armor, ain't got the gun, ain't got the mobility. The 113 is a beast compared to the 5A. Now, is it OP? No, it's not. It absolutely is not. However, it is definitely a very, very strong tier 10 heavy tank. And you're not really gonna miss out on much. I wouldn't obviously recommend it to a bad player. Never. Obviously, if you're not good at the game, the ideal way is always stay in the lower tiers, get better there, then go back up the tiers again. Ideally. However, if you know what's going on, if you know how to play, if you tolerate the new gun sounds, you're gonna have a great time with the 113 or the 11-3, as the intellectual calls it, just to annoy people. And now, again, all you gotta do is use the absolute insane DPM. Don't be the one that gets hounded by 5 enemies. Think about your peaks. Peek wisely. Like, for example, I know that WT is there. Why would I just try and peek the WZ when I can see the WT? You know, think about what you're doing. Think about what you're peeking. And then it is all gonna be just bueno. And that's it, really. Like, there isn't that much secret to Blitz, as in, learn the maps, learn how humans work, learn the tanks as well. What is this tank good at? You don't want to put it on a ridgeline. It's not going to work there. Ideally, you want to hide it behind a little rock and play from there. You know, like a little hill or thing, just like there. It's going to work perfectly behind that. And ideally, you don't want to face like E100s. You want to use your DPM against the enemy heavies as much as you can. And leave the damage soaking to your E100s, to your Mouses, to your i7s. And be the one that absolutely destroys them with the DPM and the penetration. Now, is this tank line worth it? Yes, it absolutely is. If this video brought value to your life, then thank you very much for wasting 25 minutes of your life. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next one.